Hi, and welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that all content that is found in our podcast is created for informational purposes only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this podcast. Thank you so much, and without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, the parent series from the Tarika Foundation, where we explore how parents can lead lives filled with purpose, presence, emotional balance, and joy, so that our children grow up in a home rooted in calm instead of stress. I am your host, Poonam here. Today, I am so honored to be joined by Satyan Shah, founder of Satwik Wellness. Satyan is a former Wall Street investor with an MBA from Columbia who, after 15 plus years in finance, went through a life altering shift during the 2008 financial crisis. He lost his job, his status, everything he thought defined him, and it led him to discover the difference between being driven by what and living by who. Satyan is now a certified health and wellness coach, integrative health coach, and board certified wellness coach. He helps people find balance amidst the chaos of modern life through mindfulness, wellness practices, and a deeper understanding of self. Satyam, welcome you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Poonam. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today.
It's my pleasure to start. Can you tell us a bit about your journey from Wall Street to wellness? What was the tipping point for you, and what were the internal shifts that had to happen?
Yeah, well, in the introduction that you just laid out, I think you mentioned some of the things that happened to me during that time. But just, getting into my whole world of Wall Street and how I ended up there was a lot of it was through just my interest in investing and finance and all those things. But as I was working in the industry for a number of years, you start getting sucked in to what, people around you thought was very important to generate and create happiness in their life. And what that was mostly about, okay, what type of bonus am I going to get this year? What type of status am I going to get? Am I going to get a job promotion? Where am I going to be living in what neighborhood over the next few years? And like, these are the conversations that you're like sort of surrounded by, and you start getting sucked into it. And the other thing was I was in the hedge fund industry. So it's sort of like the elite of the financial world where all the sort of brightest and smartest minds were going. And you start having meetings with these people, and like you realize like everyone you're talking to has like more money than you have, and they're doing all sorts of things, and they're smart, and all of a sudden, you start feeling like you want more of that, and that's what you really want to strive for. And so I was sort of going down that pattern, and I was, in the funny part of it, I was sort of happy during that time because I was getting to travel around the world. I was dealing with a lot of smart, intelligent people, but I didn't realize I was sort of slowly getting sucked into this mentality that more is better and that accumulating is all about, that is what's going to make me happy. And so I kind of was forming those patterns without seeing them. And like you mentioned, around 2008, 2009, during the financial crisis, it all sort of came to a crashing halt. And, I lost my job. At the same time, markets were going down. So whatever money I was investing, that money was also losing money I was in a relationship at that time with somebody in the industry, and that kind of went away. And so it was just the one after another things that just sort of went away. And that's kind of what caused me to start shifting and thinking, wow, like if all these things I thought were so important for my wellness and happiness can just go away in a fraction of a second, maybe I'm looking at the wrong things for my foundation, for what I really, you know, think I need in order to become happy. And so I think that was kind of what started
Thank you so much for sharing more details.
it.
That's so powerful, and I'm sure many parents listening right now probably can relate. The
Mm,
juggling act, between career demands, family responsibilities,
yep,
social expectations, and, forgetting about that self-care. We think money can buy us happiness, we can do whatever we want. But my even experience says, yes, money can buy you comfort, no doubt
right,
about it, but it
right.
can't buy you happiness.
Yes.
So, from your experience, what are the most common patterns parents fall into that generate stress, maybe unknowingly? As you were saying, you were happy doing what you were doing until you
Yeah.
hit that rock bottom. And, w- tell us a little bit more that common patterns and how we get stress and then we pass that stress on to our children, right? So, how do we know we are going in that trap?
Yeah, I think it's hard sometimes because you don't realize it until something happens that you're like, wow, maybe I'm doing the wrong thing, you know? But some of the things that I realized um was, your own physical health starts to sort of take so you start running into trouble physically too, like you start like you realize like you're overworking, you're over like um I would say people, have all these expectations on you, and you just force yourself to do all this extra work, and because that's what's going to lead to the next thing. But then slowly you realize, okay, like for me, my blood pressure was starting to rise. I was starting to gain weight. I didn't, wasn't exercising to the level I should be. I was getting more and more stressed. I was reacting rather than responding, and I can get into that a little bit later in terms of what I mean. I was a little bit short with some of my relationships. I realized I didn't have the patience and tolerance that I used to have because my mind was so active in wanting to, do the next thing for my work, because again, I was, just like a hamster on a wheel trying to just, keep climbing, not knowing that, I'm not really going anywhere because I'm sort of focused on the wrong thing. So little things started to sort of like creep up. And then I realized that later, when this event happened in my life, that, hey, I was sort of straying in the wrong direction. And I do have to start now paying attention, because if I don't, then it might become too late, and I may never be able to actually feel happiness because my physical health or my mental health is going to suffer, as a result.
Absolutely. I can, relate with what you are
Mm,
saying. We do get emotional signals, we do get physical signal,
mm,
but we do not even pay attention. We do not even take that pause to connect with ourselves. We ignore our self
right,
care, right? And as you mentioned, another signal, that reaction rather than response.
right.
Those are the, I think, common signals or patterns we need to pay attention to. But I wanted to ask you, uh, for parents wanting to shift from this chronic stress towards a more balanced, grounded life, what are the tools, practices, or mindset shifts you recommend? Perhaps starting small, what can somebody do today, this
Mhm.
week, or even this moment?
Sure, that's a great question. And the thing I realized is that real change doesn't really just happen overnight, right? It happens in these really small, lived moments. And so for parents, I feel, and anyone basically that are caught in this constant doing mode that I call, the first step for me, and I realize this, and that this is what I tell some of my clients, is just to pause and breathe. And one of the practices that I use, every morning when I get up is a technique called box breathing. And you can do this right now. You can inhale slowly for a count of 4, hold the breath for 4, and exhale for a count of 4. And then again, hold that breath for 4 until you inhale again. So this is something called box breathing, where you just have to count to 4 as you inhale, as you hold the breath, and as you exhale, and then again hold, and then inhale again. And so what that does is that even in that one single exhale, it tells your body that I'm safe. And if you can just do this maybe like 2 or 3 times a day before you react to a child, before you open your inbox, you're already sort of rewiring your stress response. And so that's one thing. I would say the next layer is to kind of like reclaim your morning time. And so one thing we all do, and catch myself doing, is you start checking your phone starting early in the morning after you wake up. And I sort of got rid of that whole practice now. And before you check your phone, take 5 minutes for yourself, create maybe a little space in your house where you can just sit and just do a little short meditation, maybe a little bit of a gratitude journal next to you. And the other thing I do, which I did this morning actually with my wife, is just step outside, go outside into nature and just sort of feel the sun on your face. Because this sort of, anchors your energy for the day. And maybe this week, focus on one simple sort of plant-based meal, a very fresh meal made with intention. As part of my sort of spiritual practice, I realized that, I've learned that the food that you eat also carries vibration. And so when you eat peacefully, you digest that peace. And so the main essence here is that you cannot pour from an empty cup. And like many parents, sometimes I feel like equate self-care with selfishness, but it's actually service. When your mind is calm, your family feels that energy ripple outwards and your peace becomes their peace. And so that's the essence of my coaching practice, sort of small, consistent shifts in how we breathe, eat, move, think, that, over time will bring you sort of from survival mode to stability mode. That's kind of what I would say.
Thank you so much for sharing these practical tips, even though, and nothing cost for these tips,
Yeah,
right? Nature.
no, exactly.
But I think, as you said, that consistency is important. And Satin, I will tell you, this breathing exercises really made a difference in my life, in
Mm,
my career. And
great.
I have taught these things to my kids. Whenever, they are emotionally charged, they call me. I tell them, okay, before even you start, let's take 3 deep breaths
Mm,
together.
mhm,
And by the time, they are telling their story, they are already calm. They like, their emotional regulation happens
right.
with those 3 deep breaths. Absolutely, I highly recommend to other parents as well. And even at workplace, to be honest, like, that action addiction, one meeting to another
Yeah.
or jumping from one task to another. So I started taking 1 minute pause after every hour just pay attention to my inner landscape, even do 3 deep breaths, and it did wonders to me.
Mm,
As you were saying, that survival mode to
yeah,
stability,
yeah,
and then stability to thriving. That work doesn't seem work now anymore to me. I am feeling more calm, stable, and that's what, you were saying, even kids, they absorb
right, right.
those vibrations. I felt even my co-workers, my colleagues, my
Mm,
customers, they also absorb that. And they tell me sometimes,
that's
like,
wonderful. That's great.
yeah, even across the screen. Like, I don't meet with them physically, but
Right,
I think that vibration, as you were mentioning, we carry that with us. So it's a beautiful practice if we do that. Peace starts from home.
right,
So,
exactly.
parents, we are the role model. And if we give these tips and tools to our kids, I think they are going to show that gratitude. They will be benefited. They will be better
Yes,
citizens of tomorrow.
of course.
Right? So much benefit in that. So that's wonderful you shared those tips. And perhaps now, as we are saying, change doesn't come overnight. We all need to do that inner work. So how do parents deal that, as we said, busy schedules, lot of
Mm,
demands. So we do get some that guilt also. And as you were telling us, self-care is not selfish.
right.
So, how can one shift from a place of obligation or perfection towards like acceptance, compassion, and balance? Any tips for us?
Yeah, that's a deep question. It's a very, we could spend hours on this, but um, I think, we know that, right? Most stress doesn't come from what's happening outside, but from the stories we send to tell ourselves inside. And I feel, especially, excuse me, that parents often sort of carry this feeling that I'm not doing enough. I should be more patient. Others seem to be doing better than me. And what I tell people is that, the first step is just to simply notice that voice without judgment. Don't judge yourself. You can say to yourself, there's a part of me that wants to be perfect because it really cares. And when you sort of recognize that voice with compassion instead of resistance, I guess, you start to sort of release the grip and you start going from shifting from fixing something to sort of just feeling it. And so one daily practice is what I call like the sattvic pause, like kind of what you were mentioning, like, just stop when you feel this notice of sort of guilt sort of rising. Step two is just breathe, like we just did, slowly exhale. And so you breathe in, but then slowly exhale to reset the nervous system. And then sort of reframe sort of reframing by asking yourself, the essential part of me I know is a very loving, caring being, right? And what would that love say to me right now? And if you ask that question in a very calm way, that love would say something gentle like, oh, you're doing your best. Like, that's enough. That's all we ask, that you do your best. And so I think that is a big thing. And then the second shift is sort of from feeling obligated to sort of alignment. In other words, instead of saying, I have to, you say, I choose to be this way. And so that small change can kind of bring you back into alignment, like suddenly, like you're preparing a meal, helping with homework, or showing up for work stops feeling like a duty and starts feeling like a devotional practice. Because, I choose to want to do this. And one thing is to realize is that children don't really need perfect parents, right? They need present parents. And when you sort of model that level of sort of self-acceptance, you teach your children that peace is normal. It's not perfection. And that's kind of my philosophy, as part of the coaching is sort of, transforming through gentle awareness, not force. But when you sort of nurture that inner state, everything outside naturally then starts to harmonize.
Satyan, thank you so much for explaining that journey of self-criticism,
Yeah.
self-acceptance, and self-compassion. I can feel that shift in my journey as well.
Mm.
But I wanted to ask you a question. When a parent begins to live more mindfully and purposefully, what changes might they notice in their children, relationship, and overall family atmosphere? I'm sure they would see a shift in themselves and that ripple effect will go. But would you like to share more what you have seen in your practice?
Yeah, I've seen it on sort of the reverse way, as like dealing with our parents. But from what I've observed from family members and friends is that, you know, um, I feel like, like you said, like when one parent sort of begins to live more peacefully and mindfully and purposefully, the whole family sort of energy field will shift. And kids are like extraordinarily intuitive, right? They don't learn from what you say, they absorb how you are. And so I was just in a scene actually where a parent, when they sort of slow their breath, they speak more gently, they're acting from awareness rather than reactivity. The kids just feel safe instantly, and their nervous system tends to then mirror their parents, and you notice fewer kids melting down, they're sleeping better, and your energy became sort of an anchor for them to sort of mirror, and so they start calming down, and so it's like, and the relationships then start to soften, I feel. And when you practice this presence, and this is something I've learned to cultivate over time, is to really, when you listen differently, not waiting just to reply but actually just receiving the other person, being with them where they are. Arguments sort of turn into more of understanding because the other person can just feel your vibration. And the home begins to feel like less a to-do list and more like a sanctuary. And so these are the things, right? When you might notice like little small shifts, like your mornings feel calmer. You have more eye contact when you're like with your kid. They're not rushing around. Your meals become more mindful, right? Like if you can actually prepare food with gratitude and actually talk about that, your conversation will deepen. And so I also feel like the kids then start making choices from more of a place of love rather than fear and curiosity instead of comparison. And as your vibration becomes more pure and more balanced, your home starts becoming like a meditation hall. And this is kind of what I tell clients. Like, you don't need to teach mindfulness to your kids. You just be mindful and they'll learn it naturally. You just be what you want to teach, and that will be your best method to teach anybody. So hopefully that makes sense.
It perfectly makes sense to me. I think if I ask any parent, what do you want for your kid? Every parent wants their kid to be happy, calm,
Right.
successful, healthy.
Hmm.
And these are the ways, as you're explaining, just small shift. But I
Right.
want to acknowledge, sometimes these shifts are not always easy.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the biggest obstacles you see parents run into when they try to make this change? And how do you suggest overcoming them?
Yeah, this is another great question because um, change can feel messy, at first. And the biggest obstacles I see are really like two to three things. Like one is like the biggest thing I'm sure you have heard. Like, I just don't have time. People often feel like there's just no space for self-care. This is some of the obstacles, yeah, I run into when I talk to clients who want to shift, but they're like, I don't have time. But what it is it's not about finding more time. It's about shifting how you use your time. And it's kind of like you can like weave mindfulness into your existing schedule by, first of all, like simple things like you said yourself. I take like taking a couple of conscious breaths before like unlocking your phone. Or like I mentioned earlier, like expressing gratitude when you're at the dinner table. Or in the morning, just do some really quiet stretches while your coffee's brewing in the morning. These are like little micro moments that compound over time, and these small shifts can make a big difference. The second thing I see is like guilt, right? Like parents just feel selfish, like you mentioned, to taking time for themselves. And I always try to tell people that self-care is not about being self-centered, it's about being soul-centered. When you are grounded, you give the best energy to your family. And it's not about taking time away from them, but it's about bringing out the best version of yourself for them. And so kids are not going to remember how clean the kitchen was, but they're going to remember how calm the energy they felt when you were sort of around them. And the third thing I think is I would think is consistency, right? Like we all live in this culture of like wanting instant results. And so when the progress is, a little slow, people kind of give up. And that's part of the coaching practice is to like keep people accountable. And when people feel down and they can't do it, it's just kind of, inspire them and encourage them again. But mindfulness, in this whole area is like growing a tree, right? The invisible roots are like formed long before you see any of the branches come up. And so to stay consistent, you have to sort of anchor your practice in meaning and not willpower. And sort of asking yourself is like, by doing this, who am I really becoming for my family? And when your why is love, the discipline sort of becomes more devotion and it becomes less stringent. And again, so the way forward is not through pressure, but just through like gentle persistence, forgiving yourself when things aren't working out, celebrating the small wins, remembering that each conscious breath is a victory over chaos. It's the little things that you consistently do that'll sort of bring this, awareness to you. So I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely, it makes sense. But I wanted to ask you, where can people find you and learn more about Sattvic Wellness and connect with your coaching or access resources? You have given beautiful resources on this podcast, but I think it's worth mentioning where they can find you and schedule some time with you if they need to.
Yeah, sure. So my website is just www.sattvicwellness.com, and you can easily, schedule a time to sort of have a little initial consultation if this is something that interests you or you're wanting to go on this journey of sort of self-discovery and kind of want to improve your wellness status, I guess. And that's probably the best way to reach out, or you can email me at my first name, Satyan at sattvicwellness.com. And so those would be the ways to sort of reach out.
Thank you so much, Satyan. This is the last podcast of the year, and I'm sure you have inspired many parents to that journey of wellness. I do believe with this podcast, they will be inspired in the new year to start a new journey without that guilt, rather being that more self-aware, mindful parent and bringing that peace, wellness, joy in their family. I feel so grateful to talk to you and get all the tips. And to be honest, my kids are grown up and I wish I knew these tips when kids were young, but it's never late to start. And I feel the reinforcement, the reminders are not never enough. Even talking to you, I felt more calm, grounded, and I'm sure people who are listening to us feel the same way. So thank you so much for spending time with us, sharing all the beautiful practices you do yourself, and inspiring us to lead a balanced, blissful life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Poonam, for this opportunity and hope to hear from you again soon. Thank you.
You are listening to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation. As part of our youth series, we will be releasing new episodes every month, so make sure to continue to check those out. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we thank you so much for listening.